And here we are. Welcome to another episode of Talking Triathlon. As you'll have noticed, last week I was missing and I was subbed in. We subbed in Joe Skipper to replace me. He did an all right job. But this week, Tim is missing because he's in Nice and he hasn't got good enough internet. So we've subbed in David Tilbury-Davis to replace him, who will do, I'm sure, a much better job than Joe did. How are you, David?
Well, I'll try my best. I'll try my best. Yeah, I'm not too bad. I even made an effort to wear a Hawaiian shirt, so
I
it's
mean,
all
you're
good.
looking pretty pimp, mate, to be honest.
I mean, my first question really, all everybody wants to know, the sexy shepherd. How many sheep do you have? I
Well,
want
I've
to
got
know. It's important.
there's a field out the back with about 20 sheep in it every day, but they're not mine.
Uh,
But they do respond.
uh,
They respond to me as if I was their keeper.
so you're like a sheep whisperer, really.
Sheep, yeah, the sheep whisperer. There you go. What a useful thing to be in Devon. Where in the world are you, mate, at the moment?
Cool. I'm at home in Helsinki. Just recovering from a busy weekend of hanging out in Lati, the 70.3 Worlds. It's
Lati.
just an hour up the road from an hour up the road from me. So that was a fun time of a few athletes racing and lots of hanging out and chatting with friends and taking cool photos.
How was that weekend? Let's talk about that weekend a little bit because
Yeah.
it looked spectacular. But I mean, I heard there were some issues logistically with people not being able to get there very well, and the accommodation was a bit hard to come by. What did it feel like on the ground? Was it sort of chilled and relaxed, or did it feel a bit hassled?
No, it definitely felt very relaxed as an environment. The community there is very, very used to a lot of sporting activities there. There is like a winter sports center there, which was pretty much in everybody's Instagram posts. And so they're used to a lot of big events being there. So there didn't seem to be any sort of different vibes from a community perspective. Certainly the crowds, were really good. I think the venue is great. I think the course is great. There's aspects and you might touch on, but I think it is a very honest course. Challenging, not too crazy, not too biased in one way or the other. I think the weather, the women had a better day than the men.
Yeah.
So there were some weather factors at play, particularly for age groupers later in the day for the men. But yeah, generally speaking, and I know the accommodation issues. I know the accommodation issues were talked about a lot by some people, and I think that it was maybe just a lack of communication because what seemed to have happened is between the tourist board of Lati and Ironman, they sort of locked up a lot of the accommodation like many, many months in advance. And so the only way to get any accommodation was to sort of actually know that you had to go to the Lati Tourist Board website, find the Ironman page, and then search for your accommodation there. So once you did that, it wasn't so bad. And
Okay,
there
so
was,
people were looking online without doing that and just seeing
yeah,
everything booked up.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's definitely some price gouging going on, which is unfortunate. It seems to be a theme of many World Championship events now. Um, but yeah, that was an unfortunate sort of miscommunication because I just don't think that was particularly clear. I mean, certainly in terms of transport and getting there, Helsinki's only an hour and 15 minutes away, and there's lots of hotels and accommodation, and actually getting to Lati from Helsinki is incredibly easy. A slight aside, my wonderful hybrid car decided to break down at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning, so
Brilliant.
I had to jump on an electric scooter, get on the bus, go into town on the metro, catch the train to Lati, and I was still in Lati for the start of the women's race.
I mean,
And I
I
was actually on the train with folks that were going. There was one lady that was racing, so I was like, well, I
oh,
hope you're in a late wave because you're arriving in Lati at 7:45 in the morning, so you must be in a wave that's a couple of hours later. And then it wasn't so far of a walk, it's like 2K. So it was all the public transport in Finland is incredibly good. So again, comes back to communication. Maybe there wasn't a good effort done by Ironman and the tourist board to make sure people understood how to get from place A to place B, and
I think
those
that's probably a
practicalities.
communication thing, but we can't have our cake and eat it, can you? Because I'm always
No,
moaning
exactly.
that races aren't in the most exciting places. They're always in these sort of out of town industrial estate areas. Then we put a race somewhere that is exciting, and people start moaning about the transport and the accommodation.
Yeah, and I also think in the last week, there's been a lot of talk of like bikes getting stuck in Helsinki, and then if you kind of just step back and say, okay, well, hang on a minute, if there's nearly 6,000 athletes racing plus families, husbands, wives, kids, at this event, and then they're all going back to Helsinki to fly to various countries through various hub airports. So even if you look at it and say, right, well, 50% of the seats on flights on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were probably people that were doing those races going to sort of main hubs like, say, the US and New York or Florida. And just there is no airline and there is no airport that can cope with thousands of bikes, hundreds of bikes going on one plane. There is no airport and no airline that can do that. So it's unfortunate, but I think we haven't heard of any airlines losing bikes.
No, they just trickle through. The same happened to me when I was flying out to do Norway 70.3 many years ago. The bikes just became a backlog, and eventually they got delivered to your hotel in the days before the race, and they would appear.
Yeah. But I didn't seem to be a problem on the way over, but I think on the way back is that density of everybody leaving Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday sort of just caused, like a physical issue of we just can't put these bikes on these planes with everybody that raced.
So that race itself, how did you did you enjoy the spectating experience? What did you think of the two races, the men's and the women's?
I think the layout of the course was very spectator friendly. It was easy to kind of get from seeing the swim, seeing parts of the swim, to seeing people leaving the transition. It would have been nice to have seen the athletes on the bike course, maybe once, maybe if they'd done the course in sort of like a sort of the letter B kind of thing. They could have like looped people sort of back and then back out of town. But it was then very easy to get to the T2. And then actually the nice thing was there were certain parts of the run course where you could see the athletes, 3 or 4 times before they sort of, went into the finishing chute. So that was great. It wasn't problematic. I didn't feel it was problematic to kind of find a spot. Like for me, just as a personal interest, I like to, take photos of my athletes racing and friends that I know. And so
who did you have there?
Find a nice spot.
Take us through. Who were you there looking after?
I had Amelia Watkinson and Tina Pohjalainen, who's a Finnish lady, racing on the women's race, and they were 8th and 17th. And then I didn't have anybody in the men's race, but obviously there was people racing that I know, so it was just nice to watch.
How did your athletes go?
Yeah, good. Yeah, we're pretty happy with it. Yeah, pretty happy with the performances. So
good stuff. Good stuff. Now that men's race, I mean, the women's race was in my mind to be expected. Taylor Knibb, wonderful result, brilliantly strong athlete, and then a succession of names that we all know behind her. The men's race. I mean, I don't know. I know the sport well, but I'd never heard of the guy that won it.
I mean, he was definitely a dark horse. I guess if you trawl through all of the race results in the last 9 months of every single competitor, you would have probably put him higher up as a potential sort of factor in the race. I think the race dynamic was particularly interesting. Ultimately at any race, you have to be in it to win it. You have to be there to perform. And so on the one hand, it's easy to look at that race and say there wasn't anybody there that is a true tip of the spear swimmer and strong biker. There were some good swimmers there, and Ben Canute on a good day is right at the front of a race, but there wasn't like an Aaron Royal, there wasn't a Josh Hamburger, there wasn't Alistair Brownlee. There wasn't anybody that's truly gonna go off the front on the swim. So there was that big pack that I watched come out. And then obviously within that pack, you had that core of stronger riders that very quickly got away, and then settled into a routine. Now, this is pure supposition on my part, but 3 German athletes, it's almost a given that they probably like crossed each other at some point and were like, right, let's team time trial.
Dig in, boys.
12 meters, obviously.
You still get a little bit of a draft there, though. Huh?
Oh, you still get a little bit of a draft. And I think, if you understand dynamics and of sort of racing, and is that when there's sort of like 3 or 4 or 5 athletes, that's manageable in terms of, doing through and off at legal distances, or, 3 people working and 2 sitting at the back kind of thing. That's manageable. But that chase pack that was 20 plus athletes, that's a completely unmanageable situation of any cooperative riding.
Oh, without question.
It just relies on one person on the front to tow everybody, and then that changes occasionally.
Yeah, without question. And when you've got 3 or 4 athletes who are, have decided to work together to a point, and they're just through and offing, and that momentum will carry itself along nicely. Yeah.
So it was great to see. Great to see how it played out. And the run course, the run course was, a really legit run course. I mean, there was, some pretty significant inclines in it. And then the sort of the bridge that they had the athletes running over with all the sort of nations flags on, sort of alongside at the end of the second transition, and they kind of came over at each lap. That was no joke. I was sort of stood by that, and there was, definitely, some athletes coming down the backside of it, with some big grimaces on their face from the eccentric load, second lap, third lap. So now it was a good course, I think.
The men's race a little bit was overshadowed come the end with the disqualification and drama around Lionel Sanders's penalty and subsequent week disqualification. Yeah. Do you know anything about that? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, beyond the press releases and posts, I don't really know much about it. That's not a slight on anybody, but I've got my own athletes, and their races to focus on, so it's not a rabbit hole I've particularly disappeared down. No. I think a big takeaway is probably that there was maybe a need for better communication before the race, or maybe there wasn't a need for better communication before the race, and it was just it was genuinely not a good call. I don't have a view on it. That's if you wanted me to have a view on it, I don't have a view on it because I just haven't invested time digging into enough. It. Do I feel for Lionel? Obviously many people know I used to coach Lionel. Do I feel for him? Absolutely. I know him. I know his personality. I know how he goes full in on big races. Yeah, absolutely. But I know that he'll roll forward from this, with intent and determination, and still continue to, achieve success that he wants to achieve.
Let's have a talk about the rules around that, though, then, rather than the personalities involved.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've raced triathlon forever. I don't so much anymore, but I have. And I've always understood, I don't know where in my brain I've read it, but I've always understood that there's either a line in the road you don't cross, or if there is no line, then you essentially say there's an invisible line you don't. And that term invisible line has been bandied around as if it's stupid. But in reality, as an athlete, right or wrong, whether the pros should be following that rule on a closed road, that essentially you put an invisible line in place. But I think the conversation point comes down to when the road is so narrow that in order to get to pass anybody on a bike, you're going to have to, for safety's sake, go over the middle line of the road, whether it's painted or not. The question in my mind is, should there be a rule in place that says you don't overtake when the road is so narrow that you'd be forced to cross the center line of the road?
I can't say whether I think there should be a very specific rule that says a very specific thing, but I do think there is a need for better clarity. And I can kind of expand on that in a sense of when you look at bike racing, in various countries, if there is like a section that's closed road, then even then, like the riders know that, like, I'm talking about like the UK as an example, like even then riders know that they generally don't want to be on the other side of the road, because even though a course is closed, that doesn't stop the possibility of a vehicle being on the course.
Yeah,
because
race vehicle, whatever.
Farmer Barley Mow might decide that he wants to go and feed his sheep at 10 in the morning when the race is on, and drive down a road that he's had leaflets about, please don't drive down this road between these hours. So there's definitely a need for clarity around, you can do this and you can do that. And so then if we look to Nice, if you watched, I've lived in southern Spain in like mountainous regions, so I understand like how to descend at very high speeds. And you look, for instance, at Leon Chevalier's video of the descent in Nice, and it's a legit descent. It's like proper hairpins. And so there's going to definitely be a need for Ironman to be very, very clear about, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do, because that dramatically impacts on how you can handle the bike on that type of course.
Exactly, and how fast you can go down that descent. And ultimately that descent, I think, we'll get onto Nice in a bit, but it'll be a key decider in that race. And if one athlete thinks they can do this on it and one athlete thinks they can do that on it, the difference in time down that descent is going to be dramatic.
And your point about this invisible line is a good one, in a sense of, there's an assumption, maybe assumptions by the referees on that are based on sort of semantic interpretation of the rules and reading between the lines, reading a sentence a certain way. Maybe something is also lost in translation from Finnish to English or English to Finnish. And so I'm not condoning the decision. I'm just saying that, again, there's maybe a need for a lot more clarity, irrespective of what language the rules are written in. There needs to be a lot more clarity that's conveyed to athletes of, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do.
Indeed. So putting Lati to rest, did you catch or did you pay attention to any of the Super League racing that happened this weekend?
Beyond catching that it was full of penalty, non-penalty drama.
more penalty drama. Let's get straight back to that.
It's more penalties than a World Cup soccer final. So
or lack of penalties in the men's race. Both the leading athletes, which is Leo Berger and Hayden Wild, had misinterpreted the lap count on the final one, and so Hayden was shooting through across the line. Leo Berger followed him. Hayden then went further down the road, turned around, came back in transition. Leo had figured it out a little bit earlier and gone straight to his transition point. Hayden got a penalty, ended up managing to fight his way back up to fourth, but Leo Berger did not get a penalty, and has subsequently, after the race, Berger has come out and said
he should have got one.
He should have got one. He feels like he should have got one because he did break the rule. But Super League has looked back on that and said, look, it was a racing incident. What is done is done. We move forward. What's your take on their response to that?
I mean, that's a tough one.
It is.
I guess it's a case of, what are the implications? We don't know, but have Super League spoken to those individuals and said, okay, well, what are the financial sponsor implications for you? And, is there any need for us for, reparations to be made?
Yeah. Shall we make good?
That would set a precedent. But I recall there was an incident at, I think it was like Bahrain 70.3 several years ago, where literally like the whole chase pack in the men's race got like led by a motorbike off course.
Yeah, I remember.
And then brought back onto the course. And that had implications. And I think some, agreements were made in, behind doors about, okay, right, well, we understand that this, potentially had an impact on you. So,
I mean, it's It's a tricky one. The heat of the moment is the heat of the moment, and
Mm,
I tend to back Super League supporting their officials when there are
yeah,
decisions that were made in that moment. Um,
yeah,
but like you say, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some conversations going in the background in terms of balancing out the finances across that race, because
yeah,
it's unfortunate that that happened. But this is racing, and sometimes decisions on the ground can shake out like that.
yeah. I mean, it is, unfortunately, we don't live in an era of everything is like automated and electronically monitored, and a bit like tennis,
Unless
they
you're
have,
racing in F1,
you know,
in which
unless you're
case you're
racing in,
sorted.
like, in F1, there's, well, I mean, there's even disagreements in F1, but, in tennis, they use lasers and on the lines and things like that to ensure that umpires are right in their decision making, and, if there's a challenge. So, we're not in that situation in triathlon. There's always a human element, and it's easy in hindsight to say, well, that's really obvious that that call shouldn't have been made. But in the moment, we don't know. We haven't got camera footage. We haven't got rules that camera footage will be used after the fact. So we haven't got any of that in place. So, ultimately, things do happen time to time, and that's not an excuse. It should be an opportunity to, tighten up rules and regulations and principles and practices, like Race Ranger. Like Race Ranger is getting a lot of media. People are also commenting, well, hang on a minute, but just because it works and it tells the athletes what they should and shouldn't do, if there is an athlete, and there will be an athlete that is abusing, the information that they're getting, ignoring it, what's being actioned? Is that data being downloaded and post hoc analyzed, and then the athlete being DQ'd? That's
Mm.
not being done at the moment, but is that a path we could go down? I think it is a path we could go down.
Yeah, certainly. I think for the amount of time you're in that Race Ranger red zone,
Yeah,
30
yeah,
seconds is a 5 second penalty. 2 minutes
yeah,
is a 20-second penalty, or whatever, however it
yeah, yeah,
cascades
yeah,
down through.
yeah.
I think that could work. But I mean, the Super League racing at the weekend was fantastic. And, from their PR perspective and social media online perspective, it's created nothing but buzz for them.
Yeah, I mean, any news is good news, and
Any
the
news
idea
is
that
good news.
that bad news or conflict in like is bad is like, ultimately it still brings eyes to the situation that raise a profile of that sport, and as long as people are learning and not putting their head in the sand, then we can move forward positively.
So I'm making an assumption that, being that you didn't watch the Super League races, you didn't have any athletes that you coach
No,
that go after those distances.
no, I don't. I mean, in the past, I've worked with one or two athletes that race Olympic distance, but I sort of seem to be a long distance individual, so
Long distance
kind of known
specialist.
for.
It's
Yeah,
good to see sorry, Alistair. It's good to see Jonathan Brownlee doing what he's
yeah,
doing, back on the
yes.
podium of the Super League races. I mean, he he's getting a bit long in the tooth for a short course, but he doesn't seem to be slowing down, does he?
No, I mean, it is good to see. I think we kind of forget that some of these individuals. There's definitely a changing of the guard. I was thinking about like Nice, for instance, and I was thinking, well, of the athletes that are in Nice, putting aside that I don't at the moment have anybody that's racing there. Who of them do I know personally, or they're an acquaintance? And the only person I actually know is one, and that's Bart Enners. And so it was very much to me like, yeah, there's very definitely a changing of the guard. Um, so and that's across all distances. I think we're beginning to see that, which
I
is good
think
for the
we
sport.
are. I think we are indeed. Um, did you have anybody racing in Ironman Wales this gone weekend? I know that
Uh,
Andrew was there watching and supporting, but there wasn't a male
yeah,
pro race, so he was just there sending me pictures, I think.
yeah, Andrew. I coach Andrew Horsfall Turner, and Andrew lives in Swansea, so it's his local race, so to speak. And
Still
he was just
the
there
distance.
supporting. So I noticed that Nikki reigned supreme at that race,
She
and
really did, yeah.
good,
She
good,
came in
good on her. I know.
9:52:02.
Yeah, and I know. I don't know her personally, but sort of she's a friend of a friend type thing. For some friends that I went to university with that still sort of in triathlon, And I know that the early part of this year was pretty rough for her from a sort of, an injury perspective, and just sort of getting things clicking and heading in the right direction. So it's, it's just reward for somebody that's just, figured stuff out, knuckled down, and then delivered when they needed to deliver. So
yeah, I mean, she was quoted as saying that was one of the best days of her life, and also it's gained her qualification for Nice World Championships 2024. So good work, Nikki Bartlett. She's someone that I know reasonably well and I've got a lot of time for.
Yeah, no, it's I think the one thing we can say about Nice is the nature of the course. It's going to me personally, as a slight aside, I think this idea of moving the World Championships around every year, like many other majors in major sports, is a good idea. Because if you think about it,
said that. I wonder which side of the fence you were going to fall on that one when you started that sentence.
Kona has its history, and it will always be Kona. And there are athletes that say, like the World Championships in Kona are like, they're like a burger. One is the bun and one is the burger, and they go together. And I kind of feel that there isn't a need for that now. I think we can always respect the history and the legacy of Kona, but I also think if you genuinely want to understand who is the greatest athlete of all time, then if there is an athlete that can win, let's pick Kona, Nice, and let's get crazy, Norseman. If there's an athlete that can win all three of those, and those are all Ironman World Championships, then you cannot say that they are not the greatest of all time, because there's literally what you're looking at as an athlete you can throw at any course and any race environment and any terrain, and they win.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, for me, I've been a proponent of this moving World Championships for a long time. I think Kona has its place. It can still be an Ironman every year. It can still be something that the sponsors love because it's really popular with the age groupers. It's really popular with the sponsors. It can still hold on to its identity to a point. But I think having that rotating world championship would be amazing. Because like you say, you could pick crazy courses as each year you could pick a different place. And
I think if you wanted to kind of plug into sort of behavioral psychology, probably if Ironman went with a 4-year rotation, because the Olympics are on a 4-year rotation. If they went with a 4-year rotation, then like for many spectators and athletes and lovers of sport, they'd kind of almost be like a subliminal, like, oh yeah, we're in that quadrennial cycle, and it's Kona. This is the big Kona year. Another 4 years later, this is the big Kona year. So I could see an upside to doing something like that.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, like you say, you can bring it back to Kona. Bring it back to Kona every 4 years, and then you've got your Nice World Championship, your Norseman World Championship, and then Devon. Probably would be best for that fourth one.
Or maybe. Or can you go to Llanberis in Wales?
So let's talk about Nice. It's got
let's talk about Nice.
A sea swim, and they start in the water because of the Pebble Beach. The bike has a total elevation gain of 2,427 meters. And then the run is a 4-loop course with only 100 meters of elevation, but it's all going to come down to how smoked they are off that bike, I think. Have you been to Nice? Have you studied this course at all in your tenure as a coach? I know that you say you don't have any athletes racing at the moment who are going to be there next weekend, but I mean, what's your experience of this course?
So I don't have any firsthand or kind of coach's hand experience of the course. In terms of that type of terrain, though, I'm very familiar. Over the years, I've had athletes racing in the Pyrenees, in Spain. I've lived in Spain. I've done, technical mountainous descents. I think the craziest I've gone is 113 kilometers an hour on a mountain descent.
Nice.
So I get, my now wife didn't think so at the time, but that's a different story. But I look at that course, and what I see is a situation where it's going to suit somebody that is both a good climber and a good descender. And that's a very, very real, trainable, developable, and also natural skill. And if you have not worked on that, if you have not grown up experiencing that, then I think we could see some pretty significant gaps being exposed, on that course.
And it takes training and time to get to a
It does.
standard where you can do that well. And an
Yeah.
example of that is Tim Ford, the other half of this podcast, is currently in Nice with Joe Skipper. They went riding the other day. They did the climb and then they did the descent. At the top of the climb, at the top of the descent, Joe said to Tim, "Mate, try and stick on my back wheel. Come on, we can go. You can do this. You can follow me." I spoke to Tim the day after. He said he was on his wheel for about 5 seconds before Joe was gone, and he just couldn't
Yeah.
hold him. Yeah, those that can descend very well, it makes a huge amount of difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you can really, really open some significant gaps. You've seen it in the Tour de France. You've seen people make up huge time gaps on, sort of 5-10 kilometer descents.
Yeah, and because it doesn't come down to simply the speed difference in my head either. Because as soon as you're that athlete that's chasing and you start losing the wheel, you start making or putting pressure on yourself and possibly making mistakes trying to keep up, trying to not lose as much time as you think you're losing.
I mean, I would say as a coach, if you're an athlete that's racing, that you're listening to this podcast, I would say the things that I would want an athlete to be looking at, what the things that they're paying attention to. And I'll talk about something very technically specific, but they should be looking at the road surface in terms of, like gravel, cracks in the pavement. People might be critical of the road surfaces there, but they also need to understand there's fairly big temperature swings, through the year, seasonally. And so that's inevitably going to cause cracking in the asphalt. And Ironman generally do a good job of trying to deal with a lot of that and potholes, but it won't be sort of smooth blacktop like you find in Kona, in most of Kona. So paying attention to that, paying attention to the camber of the road in the corners. Is it does the road camber in? Does it camber out? Because that impacts on when you brake and when you don't brake. If it cambers in, you can carry some braking through the corner. If it cambers out, you definitely do not want to be touching your brakes in the corner. Things like that. And then also reading the sort of the curves of the corner. Typically when they talk about learning to read the road as an advanced police driver, they'll say you'll look at the curves of the road and you're looking at the intersection between those two curves. So curbs or, edges of the road. And so if you're looking at a corner and the outside curb is closing in on the apex of the corner when you're looking at that apex, then that corner tightens on you as you go around it. Likewise, if it's opening out as you're looking at that apex, that corner is a sweeping corner. So it's just little things like that athletes need to be paying attention to, and understanding, braking before the corner versus typically covering the brakes in the corner, and even something simple as making sure that their inside leg is up.
Yeah. So let's pretend.
There we go. So that's the technical coach bit done.
No, I love it. So let's pretend I'm one of your athletes. I'm fighting for the world championships. I've known I'm going to Nice for a long time. When would you have had me out there recceing the course? Would you have had a block before leading straight up to the race, or would we have spent a training camp out there beforehand?
How much of a budget have we got? Answer me that question.
Oh, mate, I'm like a 6-time world champion, so I mean, I've got all the sponsors in the world.
So my first thing would be like, right, let's ask every single friend of yours and mine who is potentially in the police force and works on a police motorbike, or is a motorcycle instructor, or knows somebody that's a police motorcycle driver, and let's take that person, or go and spend some time with that person, and ride pillion with a headset on, and literally get told how to ride technical descents on a motorbike. I'm not the first person to talk about this. Gwen Jorgensen did it leading into Rio, so to improve her bike handling, so she understood how to read the road at speed. So that would be the first thing, or let's find a motorcycle instructor we can fly to the Alps with, and they're literally going to put a motorcycle helmet on, and you're going to go down this descent, and you're going to get told what you should be looking at,
Cool.
what you should be following. So that'd be the first thing. That's an instructional, educational piece. And then the second thing would be, and I've done this in the past with some athletes, is we go somewhere where there's a particular course, and I'll ride it or they'll ride it, and we'll film it on a GoPro, and then kind of turn that into like a mini movie, speed it up, and then I'll typically add some narration. So, okay, this is what you should be looking at. This is what's coming up. These are things to be aware of, and then they just watch that over and over and over and over and over, so that not only do they ride the course, but they watch the course multiple times with guidance and tuition in terms of what to look at. So that's all the preparatory work. And then I definitely would see a value in going there and riding the course.
And how far out from the race would you have an athlete get out there and experience the course?
It definitely would want to be, if we're really planning ahead and you've qualified a long time before, it probably would be like early in the season. And then also a couple of weeks before the actual race.
So you get out there, get a place.
From an imagery perspective, we see it once. We get used to riding it regularly, picking the line, reading the corners, picking the gearing, choosing the right size chain rings and cassette, all those things, from a torque perspective and a power production perspective, and modeling the course, understanding race dynamics, understanding the metabolic cost. And, I'll touch back on that when we talk about some of the athletes. But then when you go back, because you've probably forgotten about the fact what it all looks like 6 months ago, because you've been all over the world racing, then I'd also be like, right, let's go back a couple of weeks before. And again, just keep riding parts of the course that are important, so that then it's fresh in your mind.
And so what sort of equipment choices do you think you'd want to make? Is that specific to the individual, or is there some general rules for a course like this where you'd be looking at bikes?
There's a big debate, or the big rumor of Canyon doing something special for the Canyon riders. Do I believe that a bike weighing 1.5 kilos lighter is a significant game changer? No, not in the slightest. It's a very marginal thing. I would put it in the using a wax chain type territory. People might argue with me on an engineering perspective on that, but I think the bigger factor is, can you handle your bike? Because triathlon bikes don't handle like a road bike.
No.
It definitely wasn't a triathlon bike that I went down a mountain descent at 113 kilometers on. It was a road bike, and I was sitting on the top tube and put my brain in my back pocket.
Don't try that at home.
But don't try that at home. No, nobody try that at home. But how that bike handles when you're throwing it around at 40, 50 kilometers an hour, braking hard, accelerating in and out of, corners, that's a very different experience to being on a road bike. So that's also, I think that's a far bigger factor. So, understanding how your bike feels in terms of, where does your center of mass sit on that bike? And I think a lot of these tri bikes, there's a lot of the pro men that are riding very aggressive aerodynamic positions, where they're carrying quite a lot of body weight on the front end of the bike. Not picking on him, not saying that he's not going to ride well, but Magnus Ditlev is a perfect example. He's a very tall individual, but he needs a lot of drop between his bars, and he's gone for this setup where if you look at his upper arms, you look at where that is relative to the head tube of the bike. He's supporting a fair percentage of his body weight, through his upper body.
Absolutely.
From a center of mass perspective on that bike, that's something you'd want to be very comfortable throwing around on a descent.
He's a man who I had on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he's very confident coming into this course. Yeah. He was almost dismissive of some other athletes' attitude to, like, can you handle an ascent? Can you handle a descent? And he was like, well, yeah, of course I can. I mean, a lot of these triathletes I wouldn't even consider cyclists. whereas I am
Mm.
a pure cyclist and I do triathlon as well. So his confidence levels are high. But you're
Yeah,
right. When I look at his bike, it's top loaded. So he's got to have those
yeah.
descending skills in place and ready.
Now, we don't have a rule that I need to be corrected on this, but we don't have a rule in triathlon that you can't, on some straightaways, as a slightly crazy male pro, drop down, tuck yourself underneath your seat and almost sit on your top tube, but still be holding, your base bar and your brakes. So, we're probably going to see some pretty crazy riding. We're going to see some, where, hopefully nobody crashes, but I'm fairly sure somebody is going to, overcorrect or undercorrect on some of the terrain, and end up with some road rash.
I agree.
So
I think we'll see some pressure being put on by some of the
yeah,
better cyclists, and that
yeah.
pressure will tell.
So yeah, and I definitely think there's some race dynamics that will be, impactful on the race. So
Let's talk about the race dynamics then. Obviously, we got the start list that's come out. We
yeah,
had Joe Skipper put an Instagram post up the other day, teasing Christian Blumenfeld about how he should come to Nice with he left it so that there was 8 days before the race. And he said,
yeah,
you gave me 8 days notice, Christian, to come and race you at sub 7, and I rocked up. So I'm giving you 8 days notice to come and race me at Nice. Christian replied to that with a flight ticket to Nice in his hand, saying the big dog is coming. I haven't seen anything following that. I think Christian might be coming out for an
he's
event
out for an on photo
for an
shoot.
on
Yeah,
photo shoot,
yeah, yeah.
but I don't know whether he's actually going to make the race. Is he?
If I was his coach, I would say it would not be a clever idea. And I
Agreed.
don't get the impression that Christian's ego is writing checks his body can't cash. I
But
don't get that impression about him as a person. He's definitely a confident individual, but I don't think he's somebody that's like, oh no, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I've spent days and days and days sitting on a toilet after Singapore. I didn't have a great race in Lati. I've lost. The thing with professional athletes that a lot of people don't realize is they're so fit. You can get into the numbers and the analytics of it, but principally speaking, when you're dealing with these types of individuals, they are so fit that to get just a little increment fitter is incredibly expensive from a fatigue perspective. It's not like me or you as age group athletes where a little bit of exercise and we start to feel fitter already. For these individuals, they need a massive amount of aerobic stimulus. Now, what does that
it's kind of
stimulus
like the
mean?
performance
Volume,
increase when you're
intensity,
buying
frequency.
expensive race
Yeah,
wheels, isn't it?
yeah,
You get really, really easy increases early. As soon as you start getting those tiny increases,
yeah.
it gets very, very expensive.
Yeah, and so for somebody like him, my biggest concern would be is he probably has not been able to do enough training to feel like he could put in an honest performance. So does he really want to go and do that race and not deliver a performance that he knows he's capable of? I'm not certain on that. But
No, agreed.
I don't know Christian, but just if I was his coach, I would be like, not a clever idea.
From a fan's perspective, go on, son. But
Yeah.
from someone who's being sensible, and also from a standpoint of the history of the sport, if he's not in shape and he rocks up, forget about Joe. Joe's brilliant, and I would love to see Joe win this race. I really would. He's a good mate, and to see him do well here, and I think he's definitely very much in with a shot to have a really good race. But if Christian turns up undercooked because he's not done the training and doesn't beat Jan Frodeno, then forever will he have that caveat and against his name, no matter what he does going forward in the sport.
Yeah, and I don't think Christian's dodging.
I don't think he is either.
People couldn't,
it's a sensible choice,
accuse him
isn't
of
it?
that. Yeah, and there is people that have fallen ill prior to this race, that have decided not to do it. And I think also if you take a very pragmatic approach, let's put Christian aside, and I think like I said earlier, I don't know any of these athletes, so I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have any mates racing, and that's not criticism of you, but I don't have any mates racing, so it's a very dispassionate view that I have. But if you're an athlete that is going to that race, you don't have many sponsors, a really good day for you would be cracking the top 20 and you qualified like 6-9 months earlier, you might look at it and go, well, it doesn't really make sense for me to do this race because I'm not there at the whim of sponsors. A good performance from me is going to get me into a situation where, I have a good result, but it's not going to like affect me from a career perspective. Maybe it's better I go and do a race elsewhere and I win that race. I get a podium and I get some bonuses from the odd sponsor that I have. But there's other athletes who are like legitimately competing for the win or a podium or a top 5. So I think there's definitely some interesting dynamics at play that would impact on anybody's decision to do the race, and have done. There's athletes that have chosen not to do Nice.
It's a hell of a race, though. I am stoked for this one because of the location, the fact that Ironman's changed ownership, so it's possible this could be just a one-off random Nice World Championship that is never to be repeated. I hope it's not. I think we're both on the same page with that. But let's talk about some of the names that are gonna be there. Who do you think are the main contenders for this Nice race?
I mean, I think if I had to I think I'd break it, and this is my sort of like looking at how these athletes have performed recently, their racing volume through the season, how they're sort of ranked and rated, how consistent they've been in those performances, and so I'd kind of break it into, these are the types of individuals that I'd put in these are the people that we should be talking about. But then I'd also say there are some individuals and some race dynamics that are going to impact on the race. So, you can't look past Jan, Magnus, Ditlev, Braden Curry, Patrick Lang, Peter Homerick, and then you've got a handful of individuals that raced in Singapore. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier about just the amount of training stimulus that you need to get that little bit fitter, I think rolling out of Milwaukee and then coming to Nice, doable, my professional opinion. Milwaukee, Singapore, then trying to do well in Nice, I'm not convinced. You could definitely go into Nice fresh and ready to race. I'm not so sure you would be going in as aerobically developed as you needed to be as an Ironman athlete. So, my concern with anybody that did Singapore is, are they actually still, suffering the lingering of effects of, water issues? So, in that group, you're going to have Daniel Bakkegaard, Denis Chevreau, two individuals that did pretty well. Did they spend some weeks with an upset stomach and not really able to train? So those two might be talked about. They're not on my list.
Daniel Bakkegaard is an athlete that I'm praying for him to have that sort of that performance I know he's capable of. He keeps.
I absolutely agree. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I just think it's a big, big ask of the body. And this is not, this is a world championship. So this is meticulous preparation and detail is going to lead to, a good performance. So, if we talk about swim, if you look at it, start with the swim, you're clearly, when you look at the swim, what's fascinating with the swim is if you just look at some of the ratings that get done, there's not really much time gaps rating wise on the swim ratings from first out of the water to 20th out of the water. It's all 1 or 2 seconds. So I'm not so sure we're going to see somebody swim off the front. I'm not so sure you're going to see Sam Laidlow swim off the front because there's just too many people that can kind of hold his feet and too many people that can kind of just make their feet. And then it's just descending thing. So you are going to see a lead group that's potentially Jan Frodeno, Sam Laidlow, Daniel Bakkegaard, Rudy von Berg, Peter Hummerich. Those are the types of individuals that I think could potentially be very close to each other out of the water. And they're all strong on the bike. So those are the players that I think will be strong onto the bike out of the water. There's other people that will be with them swim-wise. Robert Willowiecki, really good swimmer. Denis Chevreau, can swim well. Does Leon Chevalier have a really good swim? But I think those 5 individuals are the ones who might shape the early part of the race up that first climb. So then we get into like, okay, those are the sort of swim bike players. Then it's like, what happens in the back? So then you've got Ditlev. Does Magnus have like a breakout swim like he's had recently?
His swims have been getting better and better.
Yeah, they have, and that could be a significant factor. But if he has a by the book type swim, is it one of those situations where Worth has a by the book swim and Christian Hogenhout has a by the book swim, and then suddenly Cam rides up to Christian and Cam ride up to Magnus, and then the 3 of them just plow through everybody? Do I think Cam Worth could factor in the end of the race? I'm not convinced. But do I think he's a major factor in the race? Yeah, I do. I think his biking skills might impact on the race dynamics. But people forget, though, because of the nature of the course with the climbing, is that some of these individuals, they're 75, I can't put it in pounds for the American listeners, they're sort of 75, 78, 79 kilos. That's a lot of mass at high speed to move up a big climb. And it's not just little punchy climbs, it's a long sustained climb. The initial one is what you might call a short climb, but it's not little punchy things. And if a lot of these guys are pushing 500 watts up that initial climb, that's a lot of lactate and that's a lot of carbohydrate. Now, some of them might be used to that. Magnus, Cam, they might be used to that. They might have, the top end to deal with that. There's other athletes that might genuinely struggle to deal with that down the line in the race, and the same with the second climb. The one person that I think just people aren't really talking about, but I know, very recently just put in a really good bike performance and spends a lot of time riding with pro cyclists is Patrick Lang. And I honestly, if you had to say to me, who do I think is my pick for the win, it would be Patrick. I'm going out there. I never really do this, but I'd go for Patrick.
Interesting. I mean, for me, like you say, you can't look past Jan Frodeno. What he did in Milwaukee was amazing, I thought, because you see his form increasing as the season went on. And I saw a moment in that race where he made the decision not to cook himself on the bike, but to fall back a little bit. And then...
And that phrase that you just said, he made a decision to not cook himself, is something that, he's often done in races. He knows how to calibrate his ability, whether that's through using the environment around him and the athletes around him, or whether it's like making his own decisions. And that's where I look at Jan and I say that the biggest piece of Jan's success puzzle is the climbing. I think that's the biggest piece of his puzzle to success in this race is, have you nailed your ability to cope with this climb? Not actually in the sense of doing it. I'm sure he's perfectly capable of smashing up the climbs. It's like, what's the cost of that down the line?
Yeah, right. I mean, he's always calculating. I think he's got the outcome, which is triathlon. The triathlon is the outcome,
absolutely,
and he's very good at calculating where to put his effort across the 3 disciplines to get the biggest lump of triathlon at the end, and that's where his racing brain comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. So those, you've got that sort of, powerhouse of swimmer bikers. You've got the 3 Uber bikers, and then I think from a dark horse perspective, individuals that people aren't really talking about. This is just me, doing my analysis. Is, the other French athlete Horsio, Leon Chevalier, and Leonard Arnold from Germany, who had a really good race in Switzerland, which has some technical aspects to it and is an incredibly good runner. Now, are they going to factor in the podium? I think Leon potentially, if he has a really good swim. So, who do I put in the sort of battling for the podium, out of the five? You put me on the spot, I'm going to say, Magnus, Jan, Leon, and Braden Curry. If Braden, he's spent a long time in Andorra recently, and if Braden brings the good version of himself, then I think he's the other factor in there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said about Patrick, he's very light. So I think he'll be able to get himself up those climbs without the sort of fatigue that some of the athletes might also have experienced. I think Magnus, I think it'll all come down to how he copes with that sustained climb and how he copes with that descent and how that affects his legs on the run.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit no-brainy, but
it sounds a bit no-brainy, but that, like you said, like for every single athlete, the thing with Kona, and the difference between Kona and Nice is that, like, if you've been at Kona a lot, what you see is a lot of people, they have a good swim, they come out of the swim, and then the first hour on the bike, many individuals race it like it's a 60-minute criterium race. And then by the time they get sort of, they go up Polani, they go, they go off easterly or southerly, and then turn around, come back, and then kind of head up the rest of Polani and then go down the Queen K. By the time they get to the airport, they're done. Their race is done. Their race is over. They've shot a bullet that they had no physiological right to be doing.
I know what that feels like.
Yeah. And I think Nice will exacerbate that because of the nature of the course and the terrain. I think there will be individuals that in the moment will make a tactical decision that, what, I'm feeling good. I come out of the water in a really good place. I'm just going to give it some stick and go with it. And they've never maybe evidenced that they can push that kind of power, that kind of torque for that long, and it's going to come back to haunt them.
So there's a name on my list that I've decided is going to get a podium, is a wild card, a dark horse for the win, and that's Joe Skipper. Where do you think Skip sits in this?
Non-factor. Sorry,
non-factor. Oh, you hear that, Joe?
There you go. You can. You're gonna text him that, and he's gonna be like, "I'm gonna slaughter."
Oh, we're gonna make a reel out of this. He will love it. So let's put some meat on those bones.
I think, no, I mean, I don't mean that disrespectfully to Joe, because I've met him over the years, and he's an incredible athlete. But I think the gap on the swim is the problem for him. And if he has a really good swim, then things could be different.
Agreed on that front. I mean, at sub-7,
that's the be all and end all.
If he'd matched Christian in the swim at sub-7, he would have crushed him for the rest of it, I think.
But there's a difference. But let's not confuse real world riding in different environments. Joe is an incredible cyclist.
He is.
Is he physiologically speaking somebody that is just naturally suited to high power, relatively flat to rolling terrain? So if there was a course that had Joe's name written all over it, it's Roth. Or is he somebody that has that sort of flexibility in his talent to be able to put out massive watts on the climb, for it not to be metabolically punitive, like accumulate a lot of lactate, burn a lot of carbohydrate, just not be able to dig himself out of that hole, and then descend like an Exocet missile. I know that he spent so much time in Font-Romeu, so I would be shocked if that latter part, that descending skill, isn't razor sharp. That would be like woefully irresponsible from a self-coaching or coaching perspective. So I'd be shocked by that, but I just think his Achilles heel is that swim.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean,
his descending is top end at the moment. I know that, and you're quite right. I think we're going to have a surprise from him in the swim. I think he's not going to be at the front of the field, but I don't think he's going to be as far down the chain as some of his performances of late would lead you to believe.
Right. Oh, that's good. I mean, that's exciting then, because then if he's, coming out of the water, with somebody like Cam, then that's a very dangerous duo on the
But
bike.
yeah, I mean, you're right. Roth does suit the skill set of Mr. 12-hour time trial champ, UK time trial champion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I generally I say, I don't mean it disrespectfully, but there's a lot of athletes that are bringing their A game, that have done a lot of preparation, that have ridden the course a lot. And I'm not saying that Joe hasn't. I'm just saying that I'm not so sure in the heat of the moment with the other competitors that are there that this race suits him as best it could. But if he proves me wrong, I'll be the first to eat my hat and say phenomenal performance and absolutely deserved and rock star.
There you go. We've got disagreement among colleagues there because he was the co-host last week and you're the co-host this week. So you've said Patrick, you've pinned him on for the win.
Yeah.
Can I push you for a podium?
Magnus.
Patrick, Magnus.
Jan.
Fair enough. Patrick, Magnus, Jan. I'm going to go Jan Frodeno, Joe Skipper, Magnus Ditlev. That's my podium for next weekend. We will see, though. So
that's the best thing. It's like on the day, so many things can happen. Both just decision. Even Jan Frodeno. Look at Milwaukee. In the heat of the moment. Brain fog, war mode. Just forgot to take his swim skin off.
Yeah.
So in the heat of the moment, decisions get made where after the fact the athlete goes, yeah, I should never have made that decision. It's just not a rational thing to do. But in the heat of the moment, athletes make decisions, and sometimes it's gambling. I talk to all of my athletes, and I publicly say this, but I think, and particularly with this course, it's like know your poker hand, physiologically speaking. Know the hand that you hold and know how to bet and know how to bluff. And if you do that, you're probably setting yourself up for success, like better than 50% of your competitors. Like, know what you're capable of, know what those big matches are that you can burn that are not going to come back and haunt you. And know how you can bluff and know what moves to go with and know your competitors and know that person always does something really rash in the first 30 minutes of the race. Don't bother stressing over going with them, type thing. You know all of those things. Know your enemy, know your own skill set, and that's the best way to get the best out of yourself on the day. And we'll see people do that, and we'll see people not do that. Just throw it out the window and go, no, it's I just feel special today, and something magical is going to happen.
How do you see Patrick dialing in that win? Looking at his skill set, obviously he's a mean runner. How do you see him dialing in that win against a field like this?
And Patrick on his day is a good swimmer. If he limits the loss in the swim, he's proven recently that he is a good biker, and he can descend and climb really well. Whether he can, climb, with some of these individuals where it's like lower gradients, sort of 3%, 4% climbs and just real power, whether he can deal with that from some of the individuals, that's a tough one to say, but I think it's a factor. And he can descend well, and he's been working on his descending. I know that he's been riding, spending a lot of time riding with pro cyclists and in mountains. And
so in reality, on his day, how big a gap does someone need in T2 in front of an athlete like Patrick Lang to make sure that they're comfortable?
I mean, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I would say 5 minutes.
Depending on the athlete.
5 to 6 minutes. Depending on the athlete. If it was Magnus, then maybe it doesn't need to be quite that much, but it might do. If Patrick throws down an Israel-style performance on the run, then you're going to need at least 6 minutes. So.
Yeah, and he's capable of it, isn't he? He really is. It's it's remarkable. So yeah, I'm excited to see this race unfold. Will you be watching?
I will. So
Watching from a distance,
just
or are
to
you
see
going
whether
to
I end up, just to see that. No, I won't be there, but I'll be watching, principally just to see whether I end up looking like a horse's ass, not with my comment about Joe.
That's going to be all over social media, that one. All over social media.
Yeah.
But no, mate, really
Right.
appreciate you coming on and taking the time to sub in for Mr. Ford. I think you did an exceptional job, much better than he would have
Thank
done
you.
for a preview of a race like this, I think.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And yeah, thanks for listening to Talking Triathlon. If you want to support the show, jump on at patreon.com/Talking Triathlon. If you want to follow Tim, he's at tford14 on Instagram, and I'm at bale.james85 on Instagram. Find us across all social networks at Talking Triathlon on Instagram and at Talk Triathlon on Twitter. You can join the Patreon group and you will get access to monthly bonus episodes and access to the social group, which is growing week on week. So we'll look forward to speaking to you all again shortly.